Alors, merci de revenir à notre seconde séance de ce séminaire sur les 10 ans après le rapport Brahimi. Donc, un sujet qui cause toujours beaucoup de discussions, c'est bien le maintien de la paix robuste. Et nous en savons quelque chose au réseau francophone de recherche sur les opérations de paix, puisque il y a quelques semaines, notre chargé de projet à New York, Lauriane Théroux-Benoni, a assisté à 3 semaines de débat du comité spécial sur les opérations de maintien de la paix des Nations Unies. On appelle ce comité le C34 entre les intimes. Et une des discussions les plus vives, si on peut dire, dans cette auguste Assemblée des Nations Unies, a été justement sur le maintien de la paix robuste. Les États ne s'entendant pas si on doit adopter cette posture lors des opérations de paix ou si on doit lui substituer une autre appellation. Mais quoi qu'il en soit, tout le monde reconnaît que depuis une dizaine d'années, les opérations de paix ont gagné en robustesse et que nécessairement, elles doivent avoir une posture ou une attitude robuste sur le terrain, d'autant plus que cela est demandé tant par la communauté internationale que les chercheurs. Peut-être que les États contributeurs sont plus réticents. En tout cas, je crois que nos deux invités sont bien choisis pour discuter de cette question en particulier. Donc, comme je vous l'ai dit en introduction ce matin, je pense que je n'ai pas besoin de vous présenter en long et en large nos deux invités. William Durch parlera le premier. Il a été au cœur de la recherche et de la rédaction de ce rapport Brahimi à la fin des années 90, donc début des années 2000, lorsque le rapport a été déposé. Il parlera le premier et ensuite il sera suivi de Jean-Marie Guéhenno, qui a été secrétaire général adjoint aux opérations de paix, donc de 2000 à 2008. Donc voilà, messieurs. Bill, it's your turn.
Jesselyn, thank you very much. First, my thanks to Rop and Serium for a chance to be back in Montreal and at this wonderful university. And I'll be happy to discuss any aspect of the Brahimi report in the Q&A, but I will focus my talk on the topic of the panel. It's also an honor to be on the same panel as Jean-Marie Guéhenno, for whom I sort of view myself as a warm-up act, if you will. And I'll be following 2 computers here, so if I look a little bit cross-eyed, forgive me. So I always like to start with sort of basic dictionary definitions of terms, of things that have become terms of art. And so robust, according to Webster's, is, as you see, having or showing vigor, strength, or firmness, which I think is applicable to the topic here today. Or capable of performing under a wide range of conditions without failing. I think that's a particularly apt definition. There's a third one that says of or associated with Australopithecine robustus, which I think we can set aside, although some of the opponents of peacekeeping kind of fit that definition, I think. So robustness and the Brahimi report. We may have been guilty of starting the use of this term. I'm not entirely sure. But the idea was to describe it as an attribute of peace operations, not as a type of complex peace operations. So if you dig into the report, you do find the following sentiments. And I'm not going to be reading all of these slides, but I do want to read this into the record. That there are many tasks which United Nations peacekeeping forces should not be asked to undertake, and many places they should not go. But when the United Nations does send its forces to uphold the peace, they must be prepared to confront the lingering forces of war and violence with the ability and determination to defeat them. That's in the very first paragraph of the report. And then back in its recommendations on peacekeeping doctrine and strategy, it says in the summary recommendation, Once deployed, United Nations peacekeepers must be able to carry out their mandates professionally and successfully and be capable of defending themselves, other mission components, and the mission mandate with robust rules of engagement against those who renege on their commitments to a peace or otherwise seek to undermine it by violence. Now, that's the only sense in which the Rahimi report itself uses robustness primarily with regard to rules of engagement, which Monsieur Guéhenno addressed in the Q&A a moment ago. So then we get to robust peacekeeping and the DPKO DFS Principles and Guidelines 2008, or the Capstone Doctrine, right? In the Capstone Doctrine, the term robust is kind of promoted from an attribute to a class of peacekeeping. This class of peacekeeping deters forceful attempts to disrupt the politics of peace implementation. It protects civilians. It assists national authorities with law and order. And it's used, it acts proactively, if necessary, in defense of the mandate. Well, then Principles and Guidelines, Capstone, goes a little bit further and distinguishes peace enforcement, it says, as envisioned under the Charter in Chapter 7 from robust peacekeeping. I just want to make a caveat here that peace enforcement is not found in the Charter. As we know, peacekeeping is not found either. Chapter 7 refers to enforcement action, which is its euphemism for war. It's euphemism for fighting the rise of the next threat to international peace and security on the scale of World War II. The difference, I think, is that peace enforcement has come to be used in many different national doctrines as peacekeeping with the ability to use force proactively, in other words, as robust peacekeeping in effect, within strategically consensual operations. So it is not just strategic or international in operation. It is what you do when challenged, possibly at the operational level. And to continue with the Capstone Doctrine, one page after valuing the proactive use of force, it cautions that force should only be used as a last resort. And I have this problem too in my Global Peace Operations 2009 piece. If force is a last resort, how do you act against imminent threats? Okay. So maybe it's the last thing you do against an imminent threat when you've tried all other sources of persuasion to dissuade it. In Haiti, the mission there in 2006, 2007 defined gang activities in Cité Soleil as an imminent threat in a strategic sense. In other words, there had been action after action after action such that they became a secular trend. And you could attribute threat to them on the basis of their past behavior, which justified a tactically proactive and preemptive action to go in, sweep up the gang leaders, and shut down the gangs. So defanging violent opposition in this fashion, rather than directly defeating adversaries, I think is a long and honorable tradition in the UN use of force. And it's also a distinguishing characteristic of peacekeeping versus warfighting. But there's also a question of capacity versus capability, right? And here's the difference, as has recently been spelled out to me, and I actually rather like it. The UN-led forces do not have a capacity for warfighting. I have the capability of walking, right? I can run a little bit, but I can't run more than about 100 feet without a lot of conditioning. But if I did condition myself to run, I would have the capability of running for long distances. I have that capacity if I train for it. I don't have the capacity to fly unless I have some sort of mechanical assist. I can't flap my arms and get off the ground no matter how hard I try. I don't have the capacity to fly. So I'll never have the capability. So when we're talking about UN peacekeeping and wartime and warfighting, UN peacekeeping will never have the capacity for warfighting. Right? It has the capacity for robust operations, for levels of peace enforcement up to a certain point, or actually up to a certain phase or fog bank. It's really literally a gray area, I think, that depends on the mission and the circumstances in which it finds itself.